Hey, welcome. If you have been considering getting Rosa Gallery watercolors, or you just want to know different ways that you can experiment and explore new watercolors when you get them, then this is the video for you. I make weekly art tutorials, paint-alongs and vlogs, and in this video I'm not only going to share my new Rosa Gallery watercolors, but also how I make up my palette, how I learn lessons from it, the mistakes that I made, how I fix them, and just how you can get the most out of your watercolor palettes. Near the end, I'm going to share something that is so simple but has made such a massive difference to my palette, and I cannot believe it took me so long to do it. The first bit, which will be no surprise to anyone, is swatching. I've made a full-length swatching video for my Ko-fi members where I talk through the colors that I picked, why, their pigments, and so much more, and I'll leave it linked down below for you. I've also made an entire separate YouTube video highlighting how I swatch, and I'll link that for you as well. But just to summarize it here and kind of highlight some of the main points, I think it's important to just do swatching in a way that best serves you and gives you the information from your paints that you want to know and that are going to be helpful. And also trying to bear in mind future you. So you may not care about pigments now, but will you care about pigments later? For me, that was the case. I didn't care initially, but I do now, and I'm so glad that I made those notes of my pigments when swatching. I like and I recommend making a note of the names as well as the pigment numbers that are included. You may not need it now, but you may need it in the future, and it's just helpful to have it done already. I think that the beauty of swatching is that you can do it in whatever way you want. So sometimes I will do doodles, sometimes I'll have lines, sometimes I will sketch out paint tubes and paint over them. Sometimes my swatches will be roses. I think that sometimes there's this idea that you have to do circles or squares or you have to put tape. All those things are great. I go back to a lot of them apart from tape because I can't be bothered, but they are not essential if you don't want to do them. So just make swatching an exercise that is fun for you in whatever way you do that. And again, with the focus being on what benefit, what information can you get from doing them, so that even if it is just a relaxing pastime that you're doing, when you come back to it, it can also be so full of information. Watercolors have a number of different properties, and with swatches, you can quite easily get a bit of a better idea as to how these different watercolors perform. One of those things is transparency, to kind of just seeing how you can see through the watercolor, and an easy way to do that is to do a doodle or a line and then paint over it. If it is transparent, you'll see that pen line or ink line very clearly. If it's semi-opaque or semi-transparent, less so, and if it's opaque, you won't see it. It will almost be like completely obscured, and this can be very helpful for you if you know that you like painting over your ink drawings, or if, for example, you love painting in layers and you actually want the layers to show through. Having that information on transparency will be very helpful. Another thing is to think about granulation, for example. If you think that a color is going to granulate or you want to assess it, then it's good to put a lot of water down and kind of see how it behaves and leave it alone. And it can also be helpful to make a note of light fastness or to do your own swatches for light fastness, especially if you're planning on putting a painting up in somewhere that they'll be exposed to some light because you don't want them to fade. And that would involve creating two sets of swatches. One set you keep protected from light, whether that be in a sketchbook or in a drawer, and the other set you stick to a window and then check on them both in 6 months or a year to see if there are any drastic changes between the colors. Another thing that can be quite helpful is not just having swatches in mass tone, which basically means like as pigmented as possible, but also having swatches that are slightly watered down so that you can really understand the different range of values that you can get from that one color. And this is also helpful if you're creating your own light fast swatches, because some colors may be fine when they are in mass tone, but will fade when they are watered down. And more likely than not, we use paints watered down in mixes and everything else. So it's important to know how they hold up in both states. The next thing is to do comparison. So if you have a number of different brands, it can be so helpful to just swatch them side by side. You can quickly see that although they may have the same names and sometimes even the same pigments, they can vary very drastically in the colors, but also their properties. And it can be a really good way to just learn more about your own colors. Although I don't think it is absolutely essential to learn about watercolor pigments, I do think that it can be so helpful just in terms of helping you understand your paints a bit better. To give you an example, both of these paints are called Aureolin, but as you can see, the colors are completely different. And that is because the one on the left is the Winsor & Newton Aureolin, which is the true pigment, which is PY40, whereas the one on the right is my Rosa Gallery Aureolin, which is actually PY150, which is nickel azo yellow. And it's helpful to know that as well, because PY40, so the true pigment, will fade and turn brown with time. So if you're interested in knowing more about this, I've created a video where I highlight and discuss this in more detail, just so that you can get the very basics about pigments, and it will just help you tremendously in understanding your watercolors. Kind of feel like there is no particular order moving forward with regards to what you should do first. I did a lot of these things kind of like at the same time in the same session as a way of learning more about this palette, and I think that ultimately you can't fully know your palette unless you actually start doing paintings with it. It wasn't until I actually started doing this painting that I realized a fundamental flaw in my palette, and I don't know if you would have noticed it in the clips of the swatches of the Rosa Gallery that I've just done a few minutes past. But yeah, there's just something so important about doing your own paintings, especially if you're getting your feet wet with a new palette. It can be so helpful to create loose, quick paintings of your comfort subject, you know, something that you go back to time and time again, so that way you know what you would normally expect, what is normal for you, and you can just focus on how the paints are behaving. Another thing that can be helpful to do is what you actually want to create with this palette. Does this palette have a purpose? So for example, I really wanted to try experimenting with creating more watercolor landscapes, and I wanted to make sure that this palette was amenable to that. Equally, I love creating loose watercolor florals, so I feel like any palette that I have would have to be conducive to being able to do that. And if it was a palette that I was taking to travel with me, then I would think about the things that I would create there, the colors that I would imagine, and whether this palette would align with that as well. So if your palette has a purpose, or if you have something that you love painting over and over, use that to test out your new palette. It is that landscape painting that led me to doing something that is so simple but I haven't done before, and it's just like opened my eyes to what I could do with my palette, and I just really wanted to share that with you too. It's all about making your own custom mixes, and I'm going to share my near real-time process of doing that now. On doing this painting just now, something struck me and that is the range of greens that I have, and I'm going to swatch them out to see if you can identify the glaring mistake that I have made. We will fix it. So we have olive green. I must admit, when I first swatched it, I wasn't the biggest fan of it. It's starting to grow on me. Emerald green. Can we consider mint a green? And next to each other, you can kind of see how mint is actually made from adding white to emerald green. And then I have jade green. And don't be fooled by the ugly color that it swatches out as initially, because it dries to be absolutely stunning. Anyway, so these are the greens that I have in my palette. The emerald and mint look a lot more green than they do on screen. I don't know why they look so blue. My aim for this palette was to make it, I guess, like a full palette, like a palette that I can create a wide range of different things, whether it be landscapes, people, florals. It's very heavy leaning towards florals and abstracts, as you can see, like lots of really nice pinky reds, which as well as purples, which are what I tend to go to. It's got a good range of blues. However, these are my greens, and for my florals and when doing this landscape, it kind of, like, don't get me wrong, it worked out beautifully. However, it's because I had to do quite a lot of mixing. So what I want to try to do is create a convenient screen that I can add to one of these slots, so that every time that I want to make a natural looking green, I do not have to mix it from scratch. And that's something that I recommend you consider doing as well. Sometimes it's just you know, rather than going out and buying a new color, you can just look at the tubes that you already have and see how you can use them to create the colors that you want. So this is PY150, which is nickel azo yellow mixed with ultramarine blue. So relatively nice and easy mix. So that I think already is a lot better, and it's a really nice natural looking green. If we add a bit of burnt sienna to that, whoops, that was a lot of burnt sienna. So if we take some more close, this is almost looking like the olive green, so not quite what I want. So some burnt umber, some ultramarine, and nickel azo yellow. That's what this color is looking like, which is very yellow. So let's take some more ultramarine blue, and then it starts looking like this. And this, my friends, is the color that I want, because this is essentially a sap green-ish looking color, which is a color that I use all the time. And I think can make it just a little bit more blue. Good. And the beauty of having tubes is that we can mix these together, because it's not just about the colors, it's also about the quantity. So I don't want to like completely fill it up. And add some blue just in case I need to alter the ratios a little bit, and then add some burnt umber. So I'm adding quite a bit of yellow, a bit of blue, and then a tiny bit burnt umber in comparison, maybe like a third of the amount of yellow that I put. I'm going to use a toothpick, but if you have a paper clip, that will also work. And just want to make sure that it's really nice and mixed, so that when it dries, I get the same consistent color throughout. And really and truly, I should have just taken this out and mixed it in my hand and whatnot, rather than mixing it in here. I feel like that's nice and mixed. It's quite dark, so let's see if I need to add some more nickel azo yellow. Taking some of that. I mean, damn, look at that. Look at that. Is that not beautiful? I mean, I don't really feel like I need to make any extra changes. I'm quite happy with that. Of course, I'll see how it dries. I think that's pretty good. And now I have a more balanced palette, admittedly full of convenience colors, but look at that, we now have a sap green. So if you wanted to mix your own sap green, I feel like that's a good way to go about it. Take an ultramarine, take a really bright yellow, and then add a little bit of a burnt umber and mix around, play around with the ratios until you get a color that you are happy with. I'm really glad that we just made our own, and that's the beauty about buying tubes as well, just that you can customize your palette and really make it what you want. If you want to know more insights on mixing your own convenience colors, then be sure to check out the granulating watercolors videos that I've made, as well as the one talking about watercolor pigments. I know we kind of touched on it in the previous section, but I would be remiss if I did not mention the importance of color mixing, and it can be so fun as well, because you can just make a whole range of different colors and just therapeutically swatch your day away. Now, I find that there are a number of different ways to do color mixing, and I've in fact made a whole separate video for my Ko-fi members just highlighting how I do different types of swatches, but also talking about how I explore color and do color mixing as a whole, and I will link that video for you down below. But here I think I just want to summarize two things. I tend to love greens, as you can probably tell, so one of the things that I will do when I get a new palette is try to mix as many different greens as I can. And for you, I would recommend that if there is a color or a mix that you really love going to, for me it's greens and purples, then just when you get your new palette, try to make those different colors just to see the versatility and the different range of colors that you can make with this new palette. And then if you want to be more systematic and mix every color in the palette together, then you 100% can do that. If you just want to mix certain colors, then again you can do that. It's all about making this palette work for you. But for me, as a quick and easy way to get familiar, I just make swatches of the colors that I know I'm going to want to use, and that is purples and greens to start off with. And if then I get curious, for example here I started adding Naples yellow light to the different colors because it's quite a new color for me, then it's completely fine to follow those curiosities and keep swatching. Another fun way to get familiar with your watercolor palette is to create limited color palettes. So picking together 3, maybe 4, up to 5 with colors and seeing how they complement each other. Here, for example, I picked the Naples Yellow Light as well as the Naples Rose. It can be such a helpful skill for painting as a whole, but again, it's really nice to just put together aesthetic little palettes that you have within your color palette. So for example, I also created one with the Madder Red, the Naples Rose, as well as the Naples Yellow Lightish. I tried to look at the monochromatic palettes that I could create with the blues as well, and so on and so forth. If you want to take this a step further, then you can also try incorporating mixed media. So I knew that I really liked the Naples Yellow Light, but then I also knew that I had the almost perfect Neocolor 2, the Sahara, that matched it. And then when looking at the different palettes that I was making, I was again trying to see if there were different mixed media supplies that would complement that, and just having me expand beyond the current palette that I have and think about the art that I can create with it and how it can complement the other supplies that I use. I share more about this in the autumn palette video that I've made for you if you're a Ko-fi member. After all this, it's time to reflect on the finishing touches. So if you have got tubes, I personally like turning my tubes into pans, and I've made a video talking about how I organize my watercolor palettes, label them, magnets, the mini swatch cards, the full works, and I will link that video for you down below. But another tip that I think made a massive difference to my experience with swatching and understanding my paints was considering the other materials that I was using. And what I mean by that is, for example, that with my Rosa Gallery watercolors, I was swatching them in my caddy book, which has 100% cotton watercolor paper, and just understanding that different paints will behave differently depending on the paper that you're using as well as the brushes that you're using. So although it can be helpful to swatch on cellulose paper or the back sides of paper, scraps of paper, and so on, it is worth bearing in mind that the paints may look and behave completely differently on a different kind of paper. So sometimes it is worth doing the swatches on the paper that you normally use as well, or something similar, whether that be that you buy the paper in big sheets so it's more affordable, or just getting a good quality sketchbook reserved for experimenting with color. Whatever option works for you. I will leave everything that I have used linked down below in the description. I hope that you have enjoyed getting this closer look at the Rosa Gallery watercolors, as well as hopefully getting some inspiration on how to explore your palettes more. If you are still watching, then you are a real MVP, and I really appreciate you. Let me know that you are still watching by telling me a convenience mix or color that you must have in your palette. If you enjoyed this video, then you'll definitely love these series of next ones, which will again help you really make the most of your palette and your understanding of watercolors. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye.